Here we go. Right, welcome everybody to the Siegfried Sassoon Fellowship interview. My name is Kate Giles and I'm the Publicity Officer for the Fellowship. And I'm delighted to have Jean Moorcoft Wilson, one of our patrons, with us today to talk about her biography, mainly about Sassoon. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Jean's work, she's written about William Watson, Virginia and Leonard Woolf, and has been described as the doyenne of war poet biographers. Not such an ancient doyenne, I hasten to add. And aside from Sassoon, these have included Isaac Rosenberg, Edward Thomas, and more recently, Robert Graves. Now, today we're going to talk...
Can I interrupt for a moment?
Of course.
What about my dear Charles Hamilton Sorley?
Ah, of course. Sorry to have left him out. That's Wikipedia for you, actually. So I was just taking that from there. We need to get that updated. So today, Jean, we were largely going to talk around Sassoon for obvious reasons, but we were going to touch on the research processes and also why Sassoon, why he was one of the war poets that you chose, and I believe being the first biographer of Sassoon as well. So should we start with that? Why Sassoon?
Well, I mean, I got into war poetry because at university, of course, I had, like most of my fellows, loved the war poetry. I mean, I particularly enjoy that conjunction of history and personal drama together with, well, in my case, the poetry of the First World War. I think that's particularly potent. The whole thing is fairly explosive, isn't it?
Yeah. And
I mean, poetry written under such pressure, I think. So I was particularly interested anyway in the period. And then I met and started to see a lot of my husband, my future husband, Cecil Wolfe. And, you know, I had done, or I was in the process of writing my PhD, which was a biography. And I remember my supervisor, Barbara Hardy, who was a great writer herself, saying to me, well, I suppose you can do a biography, because in the 1970s or late 60s, early 70s, it was a very odd thing to be doing, a biography for a PhD.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it was not normal. And it was the first one they'd had in the university. So I went ahead with it, and she was quite nice about it. And the man who examined me was lovely about it. And then my husband, future husband, said, I want to publish it. And I wasn't at all happy that it should be published as a thesis. And he was even less happy. He said, it's got to be rewritten. It's a thesis.
And you still married him?
Married him, reader, I married him. And so I wept my way through the night, and then in the morning I thought, right, I'll write it as a biography. And that's when I started being interested really in the biography as something that really comes to life in relation to the work, because I'd done a lot of work on the work, but I hadn't done a lot of work on the biography.
Sure.
And Cecil Wolfe had also, meantime, got to know the sister of Isaac Rosenberg, Annie Winnick, she called herself. And Annie was terribly keen that her brother, Isaac Rosenberg, should not be forgotten. And I read his poetry and I thoroughly agreed with her. Wonderful, wonderful poet. Difficult, inaccessible in some ways, and the last of the people to be considered for a biography. So he had commissioned someone as a small publisher himself. He'd commissioned someone to do the biography, but she had at the last minute, after a lot of help from him and some from me, had gone off to another publisher. So he was totally devastated. I was outraged and said, I will write it.
Good for you.
The insouciance of youth. I said, I will write it. And by that time, I was having my first child. We had 5 children, so that was the first of these darling horrors. And I thought, well, I've got to do this. And so my poor husband started married life with fairly burnt dinners. I would drag this poor child who was born up the street and down again and put him to bed exhausted, and then and the dinner was always burnt.
Yeah.
Anyway, that really made me appreciate biography. I love the way in which you look at the poetry very, very hard, or the letters or whatever it is, and you try to make that connection between the two.
Yes.
And then after that, when I finished that one, and I went on to Charles Hamilton Sawley, the man who missed out.
Yes.
Who again was a suggestion from my husband, who loved him.
Right.
And I said, yes, I would do that. So, and Sawley was a wonderful man to write about, delightful character and extremely interesting poetry. And from there, it was, what do I do next? I wrote another biography of Rosenberg, because I really didn't feel like, I wrote one of Virginia Woolf in between, but only a biography of Place. Right. And again, related to her work. Sure. And by this time, I was thoroughly involved and absorbed and considered myself almost a biographer. And so after Edward Thomas, I really, of course, I came first to Sassoon, because I was looking around for another subject, and I thought, I cannot believe that there is not a biography of Siegfried Sassoon. He's one of the best. He's great. I mean, Stallworthy had already done a biography of Wilfred Owen, so I couldn't trespass on that, because obviously the great God Stallworthy could not be trespassed on. So I looked around, and I said to Cecil, I'm going to write to George Sassoon and ask him if I could write a biography. It doesn't have to be an official one. But I want it to be authorized by George. Yeah. And after a year of consideration and all the rest of it, and after my husband had tried Rupert Hart Davis, whom he knew very well, actually, and who some of his books.
His diaries, yes, as well.
Yeah, he said, and he published some of Cecil's books too. Right. And they were friends. But when he wrote to say, could he possibly, could his wife do a biography, because he was the literary executor. So Rupert Hart Davis was very cross and said, no, it's either Stallworthy or nobody doing the next biography. But Stallworthy hadn't even started, and that was after 10 years. So I wrote back to my son and I said, well, what about me doing just my biography? It doesn't have to be the biography. And so he agreed, and I went ahead, and it was extraordinary. The material I found, material was being sold left, right, and centre. It was just urging. If this was the early 1990s, and the material was really as soon as people were realizing that they could sell Sassoon material, they were coming up with it. So I found a huge amount of material. And in 1990, I think it was 90 or 91, I went for a 6-week research trip to the States. Yep. And I went to all the obvious places, Berg and Columbia University and the Beinecke and a wonderful, wonderful library called the Morris Library in Southern Illinois, University of Southern Illinois, which had all of Graves's letters, all of Sassoon's letters to Graves.
Yes.
Graves' collection. And so all the rest of Sassoon's letters appeared to be in the Berg, except for this one. So I went there, and I spent a couple of weeks there. I went to the Harry Ransom, all over the place. It was great. It was terribly exciting for me, because I'd never really done very much of this. No. Yeah. And then I started looking at people I could interview. And I better look at my list, because I was really amazed at the people who were still alive. I was very, very lucky that they were still alive. I missed out, of course, all the places I researched in England, like the War Museum, the British Library, Sandhurst House, Oxford University. University of Cambridge Library is a fantastic collection.
Yeah.
Leeds, all the letters from his uncle, the sculptor, came over.
Oh, right, yes.
The Carnarvon Royal Welsh Fusilier archives before they moved to Wrexham. Right. Fantastic. Anyway, I decided I must interview people before they died. I know that sounds very cynical.
I know.
It was 1991, and
Yes.
in 67, so I had to be quick about
Yeah.
this. I was very, very lucky.
Right. So how do you start Jean, how do you start the trail? Do you just, is it, when you're looking for letters, looking for diaries, it's just a question, you have to sort of source where all these things are and then just follow?
Well, you read everything you can on him.
Yeah.
You, of course, nowadays with the internet, we're very, very lucky because it's transformed research. Yeah. Then you talk to people, other people who've written about his poetry, say, not necessarily biography. Okay. And you look at books and you look at acknowledgements, particularly, of course, they're very useful. Yeah. And you go off in search of that, and then you get in touch with the library. In those days, it was mainly by letter. Now, of course, it's quite. Yeah. Yes. So, and that way, I came across extraordinary material and people. I mean, Mother Margaret Mary,
right,
the lady who was responsible for bringing Sassoon to the church. She was still alive. I couldn't believe it. This was 1990, and she was still alive and still compos mentis. I was very lucky. I caught her the year before she just completely buried herself.
Yes.
Became uncontactable, really. Mm-hmm. And I said to her, you have an embargo on these letters, I said, when she finally agreed to see me at the convent where Sassoon had met her, actually.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
In London. And she said, I said, you've got an embargo on these letters until 1992. But of course, I want to see them, and it's 1990. She said, oh, of course you can, my dear. She had a very broad Irish accent, which I shall not really use. She said, and I said, but why 1992? She said, I thought I'd be dead by then. I said, well, you're very much alive. And I was, this is one of my terrible confessions, I was recording this interview because I thought it was so important. And everybody said, Jean, you must record it. It's wonderful. So I recorded it. Yes. When I got home, I don't think the quality of the tape recorder was very good. And I have this wonderful tape. And one day I'm going to pay a lot of money for somebody to kind of redeem it, and get me back to that interview. Yes. Which was wonderful. And she told me a lot of stories. Yeah. Dancing the Charleston for her students to keep them interested. And Sassoon himself and his holy sweater, Holey. And yes, so she was amazing, and I really was grateful to that circumstance. Really, there was Hager Thornycroft, a nephew,
right?
Nephew who was closest to Sassoon. And I came across him completely by accident. Serendipity enters into it quite a lot,
Was he the archaeologist? Did he go into? Yes.
Yes, and I got in touch with him, and I met in Vassar College. I was talking about Leonard Woolf, and somebody came up to me afterwards, a man, and Vassar was female in those days, and he said, and he'd come with his wife, and he said, do you know Hamo? And I'd always said Hamo.
Yeah.
He said, no, Hamo. And I said, Hamo? He said, Hamo Thornycroft, Siegfried Sassoon's nephew, because somebody mentioned I was now working on Sassoon. And I said, no, but I'd love to, because they had a very close relationship. Yes. And he said, would you like me to put you in touch? So I said, yes, please. Well, the only trouble was Hamo lived in Spain. By this time, 5 small children. But I had a very noble husband who agreed after the 5 children. And Hamo said, you must come, but you must come for a proper visit. 10 days. Yeah. I said, I need 5 children for 10 days. So he said, all right, 5 days then. There's so many lovely wild flowers around here. Well, I wasn't intending to talk about flowers. said, okay, I'll come. And we arranged, and he was a very odd man, and he wouldn't really say very much. He talked about archaeology. He took me on very long walks, took one look at me with my hats and my short skirts, and decided I wouldn't be able to walk up the mountain, which I did and which I could. So then I was all right. I passed the test.
Oh, good, yes.
But it was quite grueling, that 5 days.
Yeah.
And on the fourth day, we were talking, I don't know what we were saying, we were talking about Sassoon, and he suddenly burst into tears, remembering it, and told me all about his relationship with Sassoon. I mean, he loved Sassoon. They were very close. Yeah. He had one of those stories, like, you know, he'd be going to sleep at Heytesbury House, and suddenly at the open summer window would appear a head, and it would be Sassoon having fun. Hello, Amo, he'd say. Sleep. It was a lovely, really, really exciting interview.
Yeah, I'm sure.
There were other people. There were people like his cousin, Dame Lady Lettice Strickland, who married one of the Thornycrofts, I think. Yes. She told me a lot about the other side of the family. Oh no, I mean, really huge amount of material still available out there. Yeah. And even later on with the second volume, Lady Helen Asquith, whom he'd known in his years, and Lord Oxford and I think was it Lord Oxford and Asquith and Oxford, I think. Anyway, they all talked and they all invited me, and they were all delightfully helpful. I don't think I had anyone refuse to have an interview.
Well, that's good, yeah. Because didn't you uncover some an unpublished poem between the first volume and the second volume? How did that make you feel? Firstly, how did that make you feel? Did you think, oh no, you know, there's more information that you'd have to rewrite, or was it a joy when you discover something like that?
Well, it's very exciting because, of course, with all the information that you've acquired, then you can feed into what you wouldn't have been able to feed into it before. I mean, if I'd seen those unpublished poems at the beginning, it would have signified for me. I think one of the poems I saw was obviously to it was one of the young lovers. I think it could have been Glenn. I don't know. Anyway, it was one of the young men. He was very much in love. And he talks about him in terms which were very significant, a significant factor in his conversion from being the war, you know, in favour of the war, very gung-ho to begin with, and then not. So, I mean, you know, one learns as one goes along, and sometimes when material emerges later, it's a good thing, because it means that you're in a position to judge it far more.
Right, yes, of course, yes. Yeah, excellent. And it's interesting to hear about all your travels as well. Where do you store all your notes and all your information? I can see your shelves behind you are bulging with books.
Well, you haven't seen you. I mean, I'm taking you to the neat corner of the living room, and I just did out an awful lot of Cecil stuff because he was a complete mess.
Right.
And wonderful. Could always find things eventually because he always stored. What I do is, and people have asked me this so many times, and it's the only way I know how to do it. And I don't know anybody who's ever followed my advice because it's too messy. I have file boxes out of shoe boxes.
Oh, right, okay, yes.
And I file cards. I'm not a great believer, for me anyway, in the internet because I lose things. I know they're there.
Yeah.
It's not that I actually lose them, it's that I don't remember them when it comes to it.
Yes.
Safely in the computer. Yeah. So what I do is I have cards about, you know, the usual, is it 5 by 5 by 4?
Index cards. Yes.
And I index them, and everything I come across, say his attitude towards sex, homosexuality, that sort of thing, or a person, and if I've met a person and they've, you know, and then I'll put references to where I can find more about that person. So there's a lot of cross-referencing.
Yes.
and writing the story and, you know, having very painfully got the outline somewhat established, I then start looking up all the file cards relating to that first chapter.
Right.
Oh, I hate writing. I hate writing. I think it's such a painful business.
Yes. Yeah.
Feeling that there are so many connections that could be made that I'm not making. You know?
Yeah. Yes. Because I know when I'm researching, you can get overwhelmed with the amount of research. That's the enjoyable part, isn't it? Sitting down there and consolidating all that information. That's the hard part, isn't it? Pulling out all together.
I find it quite horrendous. I dread writing.
Right.
I love correcting. I love the editing afterwards.
Yes. Yes.
I love looking over it and seeing that really I didn't need that sentence, or that needs a bit more explanation, or
yeah.
that poem isn't the most suitable one. You know, that kind of thing.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But, and of course, as you work on material and as you get to know people, I mean, I remember visiting John Richardson, who was he the son of the gardener at Wearley? He was connected with the gardener.
Yeah.
He was in his 90s, and he would put me in touch with somebody else, and they, you know, a maid would come forward who'd been at Wearley.
All right. Yes. Yes.
These things are interconnected.
Yes. Yes. And quite often, I suppose it's those little details, those what would be minor characters that can provide those little nuggets of information that send you off in a different direction, or give you an extra insight into his personality or something that happened.
Yeah, there was an amazing incident when I had finished the biographies sometime before, and I suddenly got a letter from Australia from somebody, Gay McTaggart, I think, or Gay somebody, and she wrote to me to say that she was the granddaughter of the nursemaid at where was it? Anyway, she was a very, you know, very sort of the nursemaid. Yes, I think the nursemaid at Wearley. Do you remember the blacksmith daughter?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Looked after children and read them stories, and she was very tough but very kind, and they loved her. Well, Sassoon had written all these childhood notebooks, as you know, and he knew there were 9, and I found a 10th, or there were 10, and I found the 11th. And because she brought it to England, she said, would I like to see an unpublished notebook? I said, would I like to see?
Amazing.
It was amazing. I mean, there were 1 or 2 new poems in the collection, not many, but interesting sidelines.
Yes, amazing. Yes.
The backstory, the way in which, you know, and also upstairs in my drawing room, I have little copper ashtrays made by Sassoon's brothers out of the brass window latches at Wearley.
Lord.
Remember he talked about melting them down?
Yes.
Ashtrays made by them and given to Gay's grandmother when she left to get married.
Right.
Because they were very fond of her, fond of her.
Yeah.
This nursemaid.
Yes.
So it was just so exciting to find that. I mean, just amazing stuff that you would never dream that you would come across, you know?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yes. And how have you found things now with the pandemic? Because I know that you're working on the 2nd volume now of Robert Graves, and I wondered if with the difficulties with travelling and visiting even libraries in this country, how that's sort of stunted perhaps some of your own research at the moment, or are you beyond that stage at the minute?
No, I'm sort of halfway beyond it, in that I had done a lot of material, and also was working on Graves after working on Sassoon. It's very exciting.
Did the relationship with Sassoon influence you to choose Graves as another subject? Yeah.
Partly because I had seen what a close relationship it was.
Yeah.
And I had always been fascinated by that. And then I realized that, you know, in fact, there hadn't been a very recent book on Graham. And there had been some for his, I think his 90th, was it his 90th birthday or perhaps his centenary? But so I was surprised at how well it did, you know. But I loved going over the relationship, and I think I may have told you this when we talked initially. I went back to Carbondale, southern Illinois, which is the most god-awful place to get to. You have to fly into nowhere, I think, Lewis, and then you have to get a taxi 2 hours out from St. Louis Airport.
Yes.
And then when you get there, your landlady isn't there. You know, it was nightmarish, absolutely nightmarish, but wonderful material. And of course, I went back to the collection of Sassoon letters to graves because it's been so long since I'd read them. And I thought, well, this time round, I will actually see new things, won't I?
Of course, because you're looking at it from a different perspective this time. Yeah.
A different perspective. I will probably sympathise a little bit more with graves than I did the first. And with both of them, I mean, what different people.
Oh, yes.
I will also, you know, I'll be able to sort of, etc., etc. So I went back, and do you remember, I think I mentioned that I opened the Sassoon letters, and the first letter I read had a little note in a rather pedantic little note saying, "This letter was not written in this year. It could not have been." And then I discovered it was signed by me.
That's right.
I made that observation before, so I restrained myself. But one thing that was wonderful about Carbondale, it's making and also getting to know librarians.
Of course, yes.
I mean, in the case of Sassoon, it was invaluable because I got to know the librarian at the Berg collection, which has a huge Sassoon collection. A man called Steve Cook, wonderful man, had been a librarian there for many, many years, and didn't want to go any further up the ladder, was very happy with his life. Yeah. And he rang me up as I was finishing volume 2, thinking I'd seen all the material. And I was going to start with his relationship to Gabriel Atkin.
Right.
And Steve was on the phone from New York, which he very rarely did. And he said, "Jean, you've got to come." I said, well, I'm just finishing my book. He said, "You've got to come because we have just acquired the correspondence of Gabriel Atkin and Siegfried Sassoon. And it has all Sassoon's poems to Gabriel Atkin, all of them unpublished. It has letters between them." I said, "I'll be on the next plane." Well, I think I was on the next but one plane.
Yes, next but one.
Straight out.
Yeah.
I mean, it was gold, absolute gold. It was just incredible. And that was because we talked at great length about and we discussed my first volume, and you know, he said what he thought, and we'd exchanged ideas. So it was very, very good to have made that connection. Yeah,
and timely too.
Yes, very. I mean, and that couldn't have come any later. It was actually going to press. It was
really? It was that close to the wire.
Close to the wire. And then the other incident, which is what reminded me of it, was when I was at Carbondale, and I was trying to read the letters of the psychiatrist Rivers to Graves.
Oh, right, yes.
Of course, he also knew Graves and had a relationship with him, which I talk about in my first volume. He had a relationship with him, and he, you know, he was very, very, I mean, he liked both of them very much, and he was a very shrewd man.
Yes.
And I don't know, I suppose he just felt that Graves was quite different from Sassoon. Anyway, I was reading these letters from Rivers. Have you ever seen any handwriting by Rivers?
No, I haven't. No, but
it's horrendous. It is, you know, doctor's handwriting.
I was going to say it's a typical physician by the sounds of it.
Psychiatrist. even worse. So I was in the library, the Morris Library, and I was the only student there. It's a very quiet, neglected library because it's so far away. And the librarian, we talked as I was going home one day, and he turned out to be a handwriting man. He'd been involved in some huge collection somewhere and had been I think, reading letters by one of the American presidents that were indecipherable. So he said to me, I said, oh, look at this. So I showed him. And I said, can you read that word? He said, could it be? He said to me, at the end of the day, it was very difficult. He said to me at the end of the day, he said, would you like me to transcribe the letters, type them up for you and send them? Which is what he did.
Good
and
Lord.
It saved me days of work.
I'm sure, yes. Yes, even Sassoon's writing is quite hard to read sometimes, isn't it, in his diaries, especially where he's scribbled through and you try to sort of see through that.
It's difficult to read at times, isn't it? But I think both Sassoon and Graves and Sawley all had, and Thomas, all had very good. I was very lucky. I've seen the most appalling handwriting that I simply couldn't understand at all. Yeah. Anyway, that's one of the results of having got to know the librarian, not consciously. I mean, I just liked him, such a nice man. And my last day there, he realized my time was short. And they shut at, I think it was 5 o'clock. And he said to me, you know, Jean, I don't actually have anything on this evening. If you'd like to stay another hour. Couldn't believe it. I mean, can you imagine them saying that to you at the British Library?
Yeah, it wouldn't happen, would it?
So that was the next to last day. The last day, he said, I've got 2 hours to spare. So, and then he said, can I drive you home? So then he drove me home. And then afterwards we were writing to each other because I was asked to do a very long article in a dreadfully frightening magazine called Brain, which was psychiatrists and psychologists and neurologists. And I asked him if I could reproduce one of River's letters. Mm-hmm. And he said, yes. And when he wrote that, he said, you know, I've always regretted I didn't invite you out to dinner that last evening. And I thought, how funny. Everyone goes to these libraries for manuscripts and you end up with great friends.
Yes, no, it sounds amazing. Yes.
I mean, that's not part of the research, so I wouldn't pretend it. But no, it was marvellous having the transcript, and he'd got every word except for one, which was the college GYP, G-Y-P. And being an American, he didn't know what a college GYP was, so he couldn't guess the word.
Well, that was very fortunate. You're very lucky there to meet someone like that. Yes, yeah. And are you still coming across these people in your research now? Still finding people as approachable, or has the internet sort of taken away some of that relationship building?
Well, it depends. And you started by asking me, and I, of course, as usual, went off the point. You started asking me how it had affected my research. Well, it until February last year.
Yes.
Hadn't, of course, affected my work very badly because I was still traveling. And in fact, last year, I was invited to go to the Virginia Woolf Conference as one of their speakers. And I had organized to go to the Lilly Library in Indiana. I'd organized to go to the Berg. I'd organized to go to Princeton and somewhere else. None of which I could do.
Right.
Some of them are very helpful. Others have shut down more or less completely. A lot of material for Graves is at St John's College, Oxford, who are focusing solely, it seems to me, on their students, which is probably very right and proper, but which means that all the material that I've asked for to be scanned, because I can't go and visit, they won't allow visit.
Yes.
But fortunately, as I say, I had done a lot of work in advance. I do as much research as I can bear to in advance.
Yeah.
And then as I work along, I see the gaps.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's lovely, Jean. I think I've probably taken up enough of your time now. Well, that's been very insightful. Great that you're carrying on with Graves. I look forward to the second volume. Very much enjoyed the first. And
look forward any more than I do to my completing it.
yes, of course.
Another book again, I say to myself.
I was going to say, is there somebody else that you're going to write about after Graves, or are you going to take relax for a while?
But you know, I was very lucky, and this is the last thing I will say, I was very lucky because Charles Hamilton Sawley and Sassoon were both at Marlborough.
Of course, yes.
Amount of research for Sawley at Marlborough, which then came in very useful when I came to Sassoon. Sure. And I even was able to interview Pat O'Regan's son, who was the master who had inspired Sassoon so much that he'd written a prize-winning poem. I don't know whether you... Yeah. And Michael O'Regan, the son, invited me to visit the house, which Sassoon describes in detail as a Roman villa just outside the town. Anyway,
all right, that's lovely, Jean. Thank you ever so much. Much appreciate you taking your time today, and good luck finishing the final volume. And thank you once again. All the best. Bye-bye.